Awesome. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, depending on what time zone you're joining from. Hopefully, if you're in Australia, you're at least sleeping and not necessarily watching this live. But as Dimitar mentioned, we're going to be talking about SIP Gateway today and kind of going through everything you need to know about getting your analog devices in Microsoft Teams and kind of different scenarios that we have there. So we're going to go ahead and start off with a brief introduction about myself. Look into SIP Gateway. Look at what we can do about unsupported devices in your environment. This is actually big because not every device is going to be supported, as we'll look into. We'll also look through a few different scenarios and kind of see what you need to do and what an option would be for you. And then we're going to go ahead and end with a demo, live demo, unprepared for completely, where we're actually going to provision a SIP Gateway device live and kind of go through and show you guys that exact process so that you guys can become familiar with it. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and start with our introduction here. So my name is Eric Marcy again. I'm from Barberton, Ohio. As of June last year, I am a Office Apps and Services MVP, and I am also a systems engineer at Cloud Revolution, where I handle calling deployments, and I also lead our Teams meetings room practice as well. So do a lot of different things at my day job. Have a few different certifications there. And some of my hobbies involve reverse engineering, security research. I love figuring out how things work and seeing if there's any ways around different security implementations. I build different things with electronics, do skiing, and also four-wheeling. One little update is, as of a little over a week ago, my blog did change from ucit.blog over to ericmarcy.com. So in case you do have the old URL, it will still work. But just in case you have the old URL, the new URL is ericmarcy.com, and then my Twitter and LinkedIn is there as well. So let's go and look into SIP Gateway and kind of see what it means for your organization, how you can use that, and if you should use it based on your needs. So SIP Gateway is a solution that allows you to bring the core calling functionality, so pretty much nothing too crazy, but just basic phone calling to a list of devices that Microsoft has. And this is going to be just standard capabilities like inbound, outbound calling, transferring a call, dialing in and out of meetings, be able to set do not disturb for your user account from the phone, and also MWI, voicemail MWMI, which is the little indicator that says, hey, you have a voicemail on the phone itself. So again, these are designed to be per user. So like a Teams native phone, they are signed into a user account. They are used per user. So there's really not any additional licensing need. There will be some configuration changes to enable this functionality, but it is a cost per user based on per user licensing that you already have today. Now, this only works on the devices shown here to the right today. There are a couple more devices coming in the future, but today it is just the 4 different classes here on the right. So this is going to include your Cisco IP phones that are running the multi-platform firmware on them. So that's your 6800 series, 6900, 78, and 8800 series phones. You have your Polycom VVX, so you're anywhere from your VVX 410s, 411s, even the newer 450s, 350s. Those will work with SIP Gateway. Gailing T series, and then also the audio codes 400 HD. So now don't get that confused with the C400, C450, C455 HD, because those are already native Teams devices from audio codes. This is going to be more or less like the 405 HD, the 445 HD, the older phones that were Skype for Business primarily, but also OpenSIP. So the biggest thing for SIP Gateway and where it makes sense in your organization is really going to be around customers who are utilizing 3PIP. Now, what is 3PIP? 3PIP is where you had different devices that were certified for Skype for Business server that were built by manufacturers. The firmware was built by the manufacturers that worked in a way natively, but not fully natively. It was different by manufacturer with Skype for Business server. When you migrate a user from Skype for Business server to Microsoft Teams, those devices will still work, and I put that in quotation marks, that they will still be able to make phone calls. They'll still be able to, do one-touch meeting joining based on your calendar. They'll still be able to do a lot of these things, but it's because they are still technically signed into Skype for Business Online and Microsoft's backend. So Microsoft has kind of been publicly all around the place where they talk about the deprecation of this functionality. And originally they mentioned, hey, in October 2023, we are going to be killing 3-pip support. And what they pretty much mean is that we're going to remove the entire Skype for Business Online infrastructure from our site. Now, we've already seen Skype for Business Online go away, but that infrastructure is still there in some of the Office 365 forests so that it can support the old media relays needed for 3-pip functionality. So Microsoft has come out and put the below statement that I do have pasted there for you, that they are going to continue support past 2023. However, that has been redacted. Right now, October 2023 is the end of life date for 3-pip. So if you have those older phones that are working with Teams in 3-pip mode, so this is where you're signing in just on the phone itself using your username and password, it is not going to work past October 2023. That is currently the official word. May it change potentially, like the Exchange Online basic auth deprecation? Never know. But that is currently the game plan. So when you start looking at your organization, if you are using 3-pip, there's kind of 2 migration paths for you. And migration path number 1 is you move off these devices, you purchase either headsets where applicable, or you do net new Teams phones in your environment. So that's going to be your native Teams phone. So that's going to be brand new devices like the C455 from Audio Codes, your Poly CCX series, etc., depending on the manufacturer. The other option is to take those devices and convert them over to using SIP Gateway. And SIP Gateway pretty much takes away all the Skype for Business centric features that may or may not have worked, and pretty much puts them into a legacy-ish, but also modern-esque usage within Microsoft Teams. So I do have a few notes before we hop into like the deployment, actually what you need to actually configure this in your environment. And this is going to come around to a few things. So again, only compatible SIP devices will work with this environment. Now, we also mentioned that Cisco phones will only work with the multi-platform firmware on them. Now, Cisco, if anything with Cisco, if you want to make a change, there's going to be a cost to that. And there's a per device licensing cost, which I believe is around $180, $190. Which is kind of stupid, given that you can buy a brand new Teams native phone for that. So if you have multi-platform phones from Cisco, great, you can use those. But if you're already utilizing phones in a Cisco call manager deployment, for example, it really doesn't make sense economically to convert these phones over to Teams when you could buy a net new Teams phone for pretty much that exact same price. Now, again, translation, money. Like anything with Cisco, money. There's always those licensing, there's SmartNet contracts, licensing, all those other things that you have to look out for. Now, there is a way around this, and this is, I'm going to put this as not supported. But if you were to set up a Cisco WebEx free account for a business, like a free trial, 30-day free trial, when you add a phone to Cisco WebEx Online, it will convert the phone over to the multi-platform firmware free of charge. So if you do want to get around that, just as like a little lab or like some type of testing and see what functionality is there, you can do that. Just not really all that publicly known. Using Yealink phones, we can set the provisioning URL with the HTTP option 66. Polycom phones are 160, 161. Depends on how the phone was manufactured, whether it was manufactured as an open SIP device or if it was manufactured as a Skype phone at the factory. And then there's also some information there regarding the Cisco devices itself. Now, again, it is not recommended to purchase net new SIP gateway devices in your environment. If you're purchasing new devices, you want to look at that native Teams phone solution. Why do we look at this way? Well, again, there's a limited feature set. Not everything that you expect from a Teams phone is going to be on these devices. Again, it's core calling functionality. So things like E911 is not supported. The best you can do with these phones is static 911 assignments on the DID itself. There is nothing else that you can do for these phones. Now, again, that's already the case today with 3-pip. It's static 911 only. But just keep in mind that there's different things there. Additionally, there's no remote sign-on capabilities. We have to do things remotely to set things up, but everything in terms of signing onto an actual account has to be done on the actual phone itself. So where we have remote provisioning with native Teams phones, you do not have that with SIP gateway phones. Also, there's really no reason to manage these devices in OVOC or with a Polycom provisioning server anymore, because the configuration gets completely re-wiped on boot up as soon as it checks in with Microsoft. So the configuration includes different SIP usernames and passwords that automatically change throughout the device's time running, because it's going to be different than what your actual user credentials are. But pretty much you can't force configuration file on it from a Polycom provisioning server, or something like OVOC with audio codes, and then Microsoft's going to override that. So you're going to have a lot of issues. So really, there's not going to be able to be any type of management outside of what Microsoft provides, which again is very limited. There aren't configuration profiles available for you like you have with the native Teams phones. So there's going to be a lot of manual hands-on one-off configurations with these devices. So again, not recommended in net new environments, but if you have an existing deployment and you don't want to make a new capital investment, that is going to be available for you. I also did put together just kind of quick little benefits from Microsoft's side of everything that is available. And it's going to talk about all the different features, pretty much every bit that there is, from being able to do call transfers, local call forwarding. So actually be able to go on the phone and say, I want to forward all my calls to this destination. There's a whole list here, and I'll let you guys just kind of take a screenshot. And then you also have a copy of this presentation as well. We'll get that sent out. So you can always go back and look at this in the future. Don't want to bore you with having to go through all these little bullet points. So again, with 911, like 3PIP, it does not exist. It's static 911 assignments. So at your PSTN provider, you have to make sure that you have the correct ANI or ALIs or set via third party for that number. So again, when you're dealing with 911, without having to go into all the specifics and doing a deep dive on 911, having to bore everybody here, if you have static 911 assignment set for a user, you can't use E911. So even if you're doing a static 911 assignment for your user, if that user goes on a Teams client and they want to utilize E911, it's always going to use that static 911 assignment. So that's something you have to consider too with these scenarios, that you're not affecting your other users that are using Teams native experiences like a Teams desktop client, or the user may have two phones, a SIP gateway phone and a Teams native phone. But again, you can't just say, I don't want any 911 configuration, because if you're doing that, then you're breaking some of the laws here that we have here in the US. Now, depending on your country, that might be different, but then that would be at least some of the things here in the US. The other thing is that there is no notification support to the callee that you are dialing 911. So one of the requirements we have here in the US is that the phone, if it is compatible, it has to display that you are dialing 911 to the user so that they understand that they are calling emergency services. That is not supported on SIP Gateway. It's not supported on 3PIP. That's only going to be on your Teams native devices for that experience. Now, if you want a notification that somebody in your organization dialed 911, this is usually helpful for building management, or something else, some type of higher tier manager that needs to know that somebody in the organization called 911. Inside of Teams, normally you get a note, you can have it set notification to go to this group whenever people in this emergency calling policy dials 911. There is not that with SIP Gateway or 3PIP. So what do? If you're utilizing direct routing and you have some type of third-party 911 provider, such as Intrado, you can set up notification from them. So as soon as they see a 911 call come in from your trunk in your environment, a group of people can then get an email. But it's not going to be instantaneous like you are going to have with Teams, where it creates like a group chat or sends a notification at Teams. It's going to be delayed, and it's not going to be as up to date. So just think about it and kind of look at your environment and see what you have to have depending on your local area for 911. So let's start looking at deploying SIP Gateway. So the biggest thing here is that we have to factory reset our devices. We need to get out of our default mode that's using Skype for Business. We need to wipe out any configuration that we had on these devices for Skype for Business and get these to a net new state. If you are using some type of manufacturing provisioning server, so this is a manufacturer provisioning server, this is going to be something like Polycom ZTP. That will override the configuration of the device no matter what. It is hard-coded in the firmware. So in case, for those not aware, a Polycom VVX phone is going to boot up, and before it even looks at its DHCP options or its hard-coded provisioning server URL that is on the phone itself, it's going to reach out to Polycom ZTP provisioning server and see, hey, do I have a provisioning URL? And that's hard-baked into every Polycom VVX phone. If that server says, I don't even know about you, it's then going to continue down that boot path where it's going to look at either DHCP options or it's going to look at its statically configured provisioning server URL. So if you are using ZTP, make sure that the device is removed from ZTP. Now, for mass deployment of these devices, it's recommended to really create a new subnet that has DHCP options built, so like Polycom 160, 161, Yealink is option 66, and so forth, depending on your manufacturer. But what we're going to need to do is go ahead and set the provisioning URL via DHCP for a mass amount of phones at a time. And the 3 URLs for the 3 different SIP gateway regions as EMEA, Americas, and APAC are listed here in the slide. So once you set that, the phones on reboot are going to get that new provisioning server URL. That's going to help at least get part of the way there and get you to part of the way of using Teams on these devices. So again, you don't want to do this in your production subnet. You don't want to use this in your production subnet or anything, because if you do that, you're going to break a bunch of people's phones and people are going to be like, well, hey, my phone doesn't sign it anymore. So you want to make sure you're doing a net new subnet or somehow else in your organization for these devices. Other things, firewall ports do need to be open in case you're restricting outbound traffic. So UDP ports 49,152 to 53,247 and TCP port 5061 need open to the 2 Teams voice IP ranges that are listed here. Again, you're not having to open anything coming in. You just need to make sure that everything going to those IPs that over those ports are open for SIP gateway to work properly. Additionally, you need to make sure that these devices are not running through a proxy, because we do not want a proxy making these phones run with TCP traffic. We need UDP for real-time communication so that we do not have any type of latency, delay, or adding any type of jitter, or adding horrible call quality to your environment. Also, you may have to look into configuring conditional access policies to support these devices signing on in your environment. Specifically around either multi-factor authentication or other things there. Now, that's kind of the big part of kind of prerequisites. Now, what do we look at for deploying this in your organization? So first thing, we need to modify either our global calling policy or our individual user calling policies, because by default, you cannot use SIP gateway in your environment until you configure this. And that's more or less designed to be a security functionality so that, we don't have users that, oh, hey, there's this new SIP gateway feature, we're just going to go use it, and, it prevents them. So by default, this is turned off. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to go edit your calling policy. And you can see here on the right, there's a little checkbox that says SIP devices can be used for calls. You're going to set that and hit save. If you're using global calling policy in your environment, simple as doing that. Everybody in your environment can now use SIP gateway. There's also a PowerShell commandlet here if you want to do that. That's going to be with the set CS Teams calling policy, and then just allow SIP device calling and set that to true. Now, if you are not using DHCP options to provision these phones, the provisioning URL will need to be set manually on the device. So that we're going to cover that when we look at the VVX I have here next to me when we get into the live demo. But you are going to have to set that manually if you cannot use DHCP provisioning. And that, again, that's per device. You have to touch every single device one by one. The next step is that you're going to go ahead and take the MAC address of the phone, and you're going to add that to the attack. Now, this is going to be the same process that you would do with a Teams native phone, but there's not going to be any generate validation code or any of that type of stuff. This is just to get the Teams provisioning service to generate a base config file for the phone to get it booted into the Teams native firmware. And at that point, once the phone reboots, it's going to take about 2 or 3 reboots. It's going to show a Teams logo on the phone with a sign-in button on the device itself. When you press that, it's going to go ahead and say, hey, to sign to this phone, just like a Teams native phone, go to the Microsoft.com/device logon URL, enter this 10-character code, sign in with your Microsoft account, and then it's going to reboot another time or two. It reboots a lot. And then the phone will be provisioned for that user in Teams. And that's pretty much the way to deploy SIP gateway. Again, this is per user. You have to touch each and every device one by one. So you have to do that factory reset, set the provisioning URL, or use DHCP, and then you also have to add the phone to the attack, and then also sign into them. So again, it's not all that easy to do when you're talking about thousands of devices. And then that's when you start wanting to consider Teams native phone scenarios to support remote provisioning for those devices. So we talked about all these things, that's great about supported SIP devices, but what do we do about unsupported SIP devices in your environment? And this is going to be devices that are not on SIP gateway. So this is going to include things like paging devices, doorbells, elevator phones, fax machines, all these type of things that are not supported natively with natively-ish with SIP gateway. So the best option that you're going to really get for those type of devices is registering those devices to an SBC that is set up for either direct routing in your environment or just connected to the PSTN with a limited dialing scope of who can dial into it. Now, the SBC does not necessarily need to be in the same location as the actual devices, but you do want to take into consideration the network path, quality, and reliability of those uplinks so that those devices, such as like a paging system, how far does it have to go before it can touch an SBC so it can get either to the PSTN or directly into Microsoft Teams. The one downside with utilizing this functionality is that there are no contact objects in Teams for this. So when you start looking at your users, before we talked about per user licensing with SIP gateway, but when you start doing things on premises with your direct routing SBCs, there's not really a contact object for that dialing scope. So one of the things that you can do to get around this is creating a auto attendant. We'll look at that here in the next slide. That just forwards to that number, so you have a dialable object inside of Teams for your paging device or a doorbell or something else. So again, like Skype for Business Server, that used to be a command new CS analog device. That does not exist with Teams, so we have to work around that. Also, again, since this is outside of the scope of Microsoft Teams, we are managing this. There's no other ways to manage this via Teams, so it's going to be managing the SBC, so you're going to need to know the configuration path for doing that. Additionally, there's also no fax integration with Teams or Exchange. So, I mean, at that point, you might want to consider an eFax solution or dedicated POTS lines. And those POTS lines, you can put a media pack in between the limited dial scope. But there's different things depending on your scenario, but for really unsupported devices, your best path is going to be either connecting them to direct routing or getting an SBC, having them registered to that, and then doing some type of on-prem local SIP trunk with a limited dial scope into those devices. So Daniel Safran sent a message, and he says, is there no other option than manually resetting the phones before provisioning the Teams? There is no other option. You have to reset those devices one by one, make sure that it's in a scope that does not have DHCP options being set for an old provisioning server and that are set to the new provisioning server. And then you have to go through and manually sign each and every one of those phones one by one. There is no other way around that. So thank you again for your question, Daniel. Unfortunately, not the best answer there. So we mentioned that there is an alternative CS analog device, and this is going to help for the outbound side, but not really necessarily inbound. So one of the things that we do is a free alternative. So this is going to be pretty much a net zero cost to you because it's based on the free phone system virtual user licensing. And it's going to be creating a resource account for an auto attendant that automatically forwards all calls to that resource account to an external DID. So this pretty much could say you could create an account called cap_paging, something, whatever specific. So when somebody searches for that in Teams, they're going to find this resource account. And when they dial it, it's going to get to the paging system. Now, if that paging system had a way of calling you back or thinking something more like an elevator phone or some type of legacy analog device or something that's hanging off of an SBC, if they call you back, you're just going to see that number coming back because there is no reverse number lookup to tell you the call ID there. So you're just going to see, you're not going to see it coming back in from that object, but you can at least find something in the event of like an organization primarily around paging systems where you can say, I want to dial this paging system and have a searchable object inside of Azure AD. Now, this is all great, but what if your organization uses calling plans? So let's say you don't have any on-premises infrastructure, you have no direct routing, you have nothing. Again, you can purchase a very small, like an M800C from Audio Codes, set up direct routing just for those devices. So you have a SBC that's not necessarily being used by all your users, but you're at least using it for those analog SIP integrations that are not supported by SIP Gateway. You can also look at a DRAS provider, but that's not really cost effective for a very limited handset, a handful of devices. And really, if it's analog, if POTS lines are available, that may just be your best option. Getting service to those devices like a fax machine without having to rely on having to deploy an SBC and connecting it to phone service and all these other things. in your environment just for one device when it might be cheaper just to set up a POTS line, because at that point you're buying an SBC, you have to worry about SSL certificate renewal. There's a lot of things additionally to that. So really you need to look at this from multiple perspectives and determine what is the best option for your environment. So before we hop into a live demo, I do have a few scenarios here, and kind of let's talk through this and look at, what solution should you use. So 3 different scenarios. First scenario being your organization currently has Skype server and hybrid and are looking to move to Microsoft Teams Voice without investing in new hardware. What do you use? If it's supported device, we're going to want to use SIP gateway devices. If they're unsupported, you may want to look at just doing net new phones, especially when it's user facing. Again, if you have a current solution that's not supported by SIP gateway, let's say you have some other manufacturer's phones, like let's say I don't know, Yealink T48S. So it's not natively supported by SIP gateway. It's supported by 3PIP today, but you want to move to a solution. The best solution is going to be moving that to a Teams native phone instead of using SIP gateway. But if you already have a supported device, you may want to be able to use SIP gateway today and then later on move to Teams without having to do that investment today. That is another option. Again, with Cisco and Open SIP phones, and you're looking to Teams Voice with existing hardware, if they're supported, you can do that. But also, again, look at cost prohibitive measures that are in place, because again, Cisco is going to have that licensing change cost for changing the firmware on those devices. So you do want to look at that. And then any type of paging system, elevator, phones, fax machines are needed. What do I use? At that point, look into POTS lines, look into an SBC, connected to Teams via direct routing, look into those type of systems, because you're not going to be able to natively register those to Teams or Teams SIP gateway. So with all that out of the way, we're going to go ahead and look at a SIP gateway provisioning demo. So this is going to be a live demo of what do you do to configure a phone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring over a UI. So here next to me, I have a Polycom VVX 600. And we're going to go ahead and log into this phone. So this phone has been factory reset. It is not in the Skype profile, it is in the SIP profile. So if you have Skype factory phones, you're going to have to change that profile as well before you can even do this part. And then I've also enabled the web server on it so I can log into that via a web browser. So I'm going to go to here is log in with the default password of 456. If you're on firmware 6.3 or newer on these devices, the 600s can't go that high, but if you have like a 601 and you're on the 6.3 firmware, you are going to have to set a pin manually on the phone before you can even get to the spot, because it does not let you use the default 456. And what we're going to go do is we're going to go into our simple setup page. I believe it's SIP setup. It's been a little bit actually since I went here. Oh, sorry, my bad. Settings and then provisioning server. At this point, you're going to see a provisioning server URL and all these other things listed here, and pretty much what do I put here. And again, that's going to go back to our slide that we had on the provisioning server URL. So since I am in America, I'm going to put the URL here for the North America IP SIP gateway functionality. We're also going to make sure we set the server type here to HTTP, so that's matching what we have in our URL. And we're going to go ahead and click save. Going to hit save, configuration changes. And then the phone next to me is going to pretty much sit here. There's a chance it may reboot. In this case, it did reboot. You guys heard that little ding there. But what I'm going to also do, just as another thing, is just reboot the phone. The phone's going to completely reboot, and you'll hear that also go off of here again. Give it a second. Phone's locked up here. I'm going to try to bring my camera up here, actually. Let me make sure that the background blur is not on. Okay. And you guys can see me. So now the device is rebooting, and the device is going to go through its provisioning process of getting the base Teams firmware. Now, the thing is that we do want to look at also is our Teams admin center. So if we pull up admin.teams, Microsoft.com, and I go through here, sign into one of my lab accounts here real quick, and give it a second. And I've already kind of gone through and got some things put in place so that we didn't have to wait too long for provisioning for the demo purposes. But if we go in here into the admin center, we go into Teams devices and then SIP devices. we will go ahead and see up here, actions, provision devices. We will see some devices that are either waiting on activation or waiting for sign-in. Now, this is where you're going to go ahead and add the 12-character MAC address along with a just generic location of where you have this phone at, so you know that. And then if I go back into our SIP devices, we're going to start seeing some devices pop up here. Now, since this phone has been signed in before, it's going to look a little bit different. You're not going to necessarily see this here until it's fully signed in and provisioned, but the phone rebooted, and now it's rebooting again because it's now got its configuration profile from Microsoft. So we're going to give that here a few, and look at that. Now, while we wait for this phone provision and get us to the point where we can sign into the phone, a couple things I want to show you guys here while we're here. What type of configuration items do I have on these devices? So if I were to click on like this, display name here, which is going to bring up this information about the phone, I can look at the software health on the phone, look at the details of who signed into it, the MAC address, and any type of history that's been against the device in terms of like configuration changes or things done on Microsoft's side. But the pretty much only thing you can do from the Teams Admin Center for SIP Gateway devices is refresh the details or restart. That's the only functionality you have. So when you look at Teams native phones, you have configuration profiles where you can push down all these other fun features such as the time zone, all these other things. SIP Gateway, there's none of that. That's going to have to be manually set on the phone. So you are pretty much just able to look in here, see who signed in with a SIP Gateway device, and that's going to be it. Now, since my phone has been provisioned previously for Teams, it got its configuration very quick. Depending on your environment, it can take up to 15 minutes before it gets the base configuration profile. But if we look here at the phone itself, actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop a screen share here real quick, just so you guys get a full screen video here. If we look at the phone here, the phone is rebooted, and it's going to say sign to make an emergency call. But if you look here, it has the Teams logo showing here in the center of the screen. Which is going to be your primary way to know that it's provisioned as a Teams SIP Gateway device, but is not signed in. So if we press the sign in button here, it's going to go ahead and give you a, as I click away from it, a URL and a passcode to set in on the device. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to reshare my screen again. I'm going to show you guys what this looks like from a user's perspective of signing into this phone. So you're going to go to the Microsoft.com/device login link, and it's going to go ahead and say, enter the code that I have displayed on my phone. So I'm going to go ahead and enter this in. Hopefully nobody here decides to steal this code real quick from me. And it's going to ask, what account do you want to sign in? Now, this account does not have enterprise voice capabilities, so I'm going to sign into one of my other accounts here real quick. Go. I'm going to go ahead and sign in, do the 2FA approval here real quick. And that's what it looks like from a user's perspective of signing into this phone. It's going to say we're trying to sign to Teams SIP Gateway. We're going to click continue. It's going to say you have signed in successfully. At that point, I'm going to hurry up and try to get my screen share off now. The phone is going to reboot. It's going to go from its white screen. It's going to go ahead and reboot and pretty much state that it is reprovisioning this device as a Teams phone. So it's going to show reboot initiated. Now let's give it a second here. And as Holger did mention that the registration of the phone does work without adding it to the tech, that is correct. So there's kind of two ways of looking at this. The phone itself, when they look out for a configuration, it's going to look out to a 0-character 12-bit MAC address. So it's going to go say 000.cfg. It's going to reach out to the Teams SIP Gateway service and say, do I have a config? That'll provision the phone. The reason why Microsoft has recommended adding that is just so you have a list of devices that you have provisioned or that are planning to provision inside the tech, so you have a record of that that have not necessarily been signed in, but it's not necessarily a need to do so. And then the phone here is still rebooting. It's starting up the phone application itself. Second. Trying to do a live demo here with showing you guys a screen, but it is not all that easy without having like some type of screen share. Oh yeah, there you go. and give it a second. So we're going to show the device showing its standard boot procedure. And here in a second, we should have it pop up and be provisioned as a Teams phone. We'll give that here in a second. Hopefully you guys can actually see this in the remote camera. Hopefully it's not all pixelated and that doesn't oh, so is it going to reboot again? Nope, I think it's provisioning now. Hold on. I remember for next time, if I do one of these again remotely, that I'll get a screen share going. So again, thank you for the tool there. Give it a second. Again, like I mentioned, there are multiple reboots to this process. So just restarted the phone application again. Didn't reboot the entire phone, but it restarted the phone application. But it's almost done provisioning, but we started to see the phone number pop up. And at that point, the phone is finishing its provisioning process, and we now have the provisioning successful message on the center of the screen. So at this point, we should be able to dial out. So if I dial my cell phone number, hopefully everything here is working. And as you guys can see, I have an incoming call. Testing 1, 2, 3. And we have a working SIP gateway device. From the phone itself, just so you guys are aware, if you are planning on using this in a common area phone scenario, typically with Teams common area phones, you can pretty much say, hey, as soon as we have a common area IP phone policy, unless you sign as an admin to the device, you can't sign out of your Teams admin account. Right here on the home screen is a sign out button. So depending on how you're using this in your organization, you may or may not want a SIP gateway device. You may just want to make sure that those are actual Teams native phones where you can lock that down, because having a sign out button on your home screen is not a good scenario, and especially in a common area phone, because you get some type of person running through there. Hey, let's sign out of all these phones. Now you got to go through and reprovision them all. So yeah, that's just one thing to mention. But here at the bottom, we have our call forwarding options, and this is going to be different things. So you can dial that number to set different things on the phone. There's also, if I go back here to my home screen, DND. So as soon as I enable DND, that will actually set it in Teams as well, where I can set Do Not Disturb. If I press it again, I'll remove that. I have a recent call log that's listed here. And then also, I also have my voicemail. Now, voicemail is going to go ahead and show you how many messages you have. So it's going to show you like everything you have when you had a 3-pip phone. But if I hit connect, it's still going to be the dial-in voicemail service that you're used to with Cloud Voicemail and Microsoft Teams.
Main menu.
That's actually really nice to know that you can move the mouse on the phone. That's actually really, really nice. Thank you for that. So yeah, the thing here though is that there's, again, no calendar. So when you're using 3-pip phones, there is a calendar. You can do one-touch meeting joins still on those phones. With SIP Gateway, there's none of that. Again, it's just core calling functionality. So pretty much treat this as a phone. There's no call park pickup or anything on them. It's just basic inbound, outbound calling, transfer to voicemail, transfer calls, DND. It's not that much. So again, when you start looking at those type of things, make sure you look at a time. If you need those features, look at a Teams native solution where possible. So with that, we'll go back to our presentation here. Make sure I am presenting. Yep. And do we have any questions regarding this?
Well, as far as I can tell from the chat, you covered pretty much everything. Being proactive there. You got the tip for the tool as well. It came from the German track, so
appreciate that.
Yeah, so yeah, if anybody needs to shoot a question, no worries. Yeah, just so far we are good as far as the question goes. So, very informative session, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Good, the demo worked.
Yeah, it worked. Thank God. Praise to the demo gods. And if anybody does have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on my blog or via my Twitter or other forms of social media. I'm more than happy to help out in any scenarios or any other questions you guys do have. Door's always open. So if you guys do have any issues, things of that nature, do feel free to let me know.